Welcome to the Grit Blueprint Podcast.
I'm your host, Stefanie Couch. This podcast is about branding, building, and business. It also highlights the grit that it takes to be successful in business and in life. Let's get started. Welcome to the Grit Blueprint Podcast with Stefanie Couch. I'm excited to have a wonderful guest today. We met in Florida at a mastermind event last year, and she is an incredible financial advisor and many more things, business owner, and I'm excited to have you here. Welcome to the podcast, Leah.
Thank you so much for having me. It's my pleasure to be here.
And we haven't seen each other in a little while, but I know we've both been traveling and doing lots of exciting things. I see you on LinkedIn all the time, and it's really fun to see you just doing some incredible work, especially with women, which we're going to get into later. But I want you to tell me a little bit about you, who you are and your background, and how you got into the world of financial advising and what you're doing today.
Absolutely. So I got into this world in a very backwards way. I have my master's degree in education. My bachelor's degree is in sociology. So I didn't study finance or accounting. And I was teaching for Baltimore City Public Schools, and I got really burnt out in the classroom. And I was drowning in student loan debt at the time and just needed a job. And so I took a job at a temp job at an investment bank in Baltimore at the time. And literally the day I walked in, Stefanie, I felt like everybody around me was speaking a foreign language. I had no idea what they were talking about.
Yeah.
I was working as an administrative assistant in the equity research department. I couldn't have even told you what equity research was when I walked in. But I was very, very fortunate in that I had some wonderful mentors at that firm and the other firms that followed. And I kind of grew up in the equity research world. I did a ton of studying on my own and learning all about investing and stocks and general financial planning, just things that I really had no background in whatsoever before this. And I became ultimately a senior publishing equity research analyst, and people cared about what I had to say about individual stocks. And it was pretty amazing, kind of the starting point of going from administrative assistant all the way up to publishing senior analyst.
And for those of the listeners and myself that maybe don't know exactly what an equity research person does every day, just give me like a 20-second what that is. Because unlike you, probably like you were the first day, some people do not understand what that means.
For sure. And I get it because I totally didn't. An equity research analyst is a stock analyst. So you analyze stocks. I was on the sell side. So what we would do is we would analyze stocks and then publish our opinions on those stocks for some of the big portfolio managers. So the mutual fund portfolios, the hedge funds, the pension funds, things like that would review our reports in order to get ideas about what they wanted to invest in.
Awesome. Okay. So tell me what happens next. So now you moved up the chain, you're senior advisor.
Yeah. So I wanted to have a family, Stefanie, and my ex-husband and I were looking to adopt. We were adopting through the foster care system, and we were trying to get through all those foster care classes. But as an analyst, I was traveling a lot, and it was hard to get through the process, let alone be the parent that I wanted to be once we were done and we had children in our home. So I decided to leave equity research and go into traditional financial advisory work. I went to one of the big broker dealers and learned about how to support families and individuals through financial planning and general financial advisory work. And then it was shortly thereafter that we were very blessed to bring 3 children into our home, a sibling group. At the time, they were 1, 4, and 5. And so I went from 0 children to 3 overnight.
That's a big adjustment. Talk about an investment. That's a big investment.
And a budgeting nightmare, quite frankly. And so it definitely inspires the work that I do because, having a big change in your life like that, and having your expenses kind of explode overnight, it can feel very overwhelming. And I was a financial professional, and I was really overwhelmed with all the changes. And so I understand that people have these unexpected things, and they can be wonderful things. Sometimes they're not, but, it doesn't matter. The change is a change, and it requires a lot of intentional financial planning to get through it.
Yeah, I can imagine that is just, especially with younger kids that are still in diapers and not in school. So where you do childcare, and that's a lot. With 3 at one time, that's a huge jump. So you have this wonderful thing happen, and you're already doing financial advising, like you said, for people. And how did you then move into now owning your own business? And talk a little bit about that and what you're doing today.
Yeah, so I ended up going through my own divorce. My ex-husband and I realized that we did not parent well together, although we do have a very positive co-parenting relationship, which is awesome. And I quickly found that it was very hard to keep a job and to be able to be the mom that I wanted to be. My kids have various therapy needs and, activities and whatnot. And to be able to be available to them, it was just really difficult. And, I just gone through this divorce. I was feeling very unsteady. And then I lost my job. And I was like, okay, what am I going to do now? And I realized after applying for some jobs and doing some interviews that I just was having a hard time finding the lifestyle that I wanted within a traditional role. And so I decided to go out on my own. And I started Intentional Divorce Solutions first to help people through the divorce process. I find that traditional broker dealers just don't support people through divorce very well. And there's a huge need for this. But then many of our divorcing clients would come and they would get to know us, and they would really, be working closely with us, and they would want to stay on for ongoing financial planning and investment management. And so I opened Intentional Wealth Partners to be able to really serve them on an ongoing basis.
That's so awesome. And what year was that you started that?
In 2016.
So it's so cool to me to hear, and you hear this a lot with entrepreneurs. I know it's a reason why I'm doing what I'm doing, that you had a problem and you decided to solve it for the next person that had that same problem when you needed it probably the most. There maybe wasn't the support that you wanted. And I love that you took it into your own hands and said, like, hey, not only am I going to go start my own business, but I'm going to go start my own business helping people do the thing that I just went through that I really needed support on. So cool that you're doing that. We're going to dive in very deeply into that part with the financial planning that you're doing, especially around the divorces, because I think that's something that we don't like to talk about, right? It's like the worst case scenario. It can be very devastating in your life and your financing, your family. But you need someone there that understands the options and also can help you really deal with these. It's a crisis for most people, and they need some support. So I love what you're doing. But I do want to talk a little bit more. This is a personal opinion, so it may be totally wrong, but I feel like most people, even a lot of business people, finances and financial education and really understanding the nuances of some of these things seems like something you need, like an MIT doctorate degree to really be good at. Or you need, someone like you, and I think you do need a professional to help, especially once you start making a lot of money and taxes are in play and you're trying to do all these strategies. Talk me through the average person, really emphasizing that financial guidance and what that looks like. And I know you're certified in several states, so talk about that a little bit too, how you help people. But what does that look like for someone who maybe feels ignorant around the subject? Where do they start to kind of dig in to understand this and to feel competent in this financial education space?
It's tough because, I do a free workshop where I talk about all of the various aspects of financial planning and wealth management. And one of the things I talk about is there may be areas where you feel really strong. Like sometimes people feel like they can really do a great job with budgeting, which is fantastic. And it's kind of one of those core foundational skills, but they don't necessarily know anything about tax planning, or they don't necessarily know anything about selecting investments. There's a lot to it. When we do a financial plan with somebody, we always start initially with really understanding what their goals are, what they're trying to accomplish. And this is critical. And a lot of times people are coming to me saying, I heard this on TikTok, or I heard this on Instagram, and, should I do this? And it's like, well, let's take a step back and go back to your goals, your priorities, and your concerns. And does this strategy make any sense for what you're doing whatsoever? Sometimes it really doesn't. Sometimes maybe. But that's the thing that we really have to remember, is that social media isn't necessarily the place to get that financial information because it's not personalized.
Yeah.
It's hard to know what the background is or the intention is of the person who is providing that.
And you have to also think about the nature of most social media, especially on TikTok, is sensationalized to make you stop, to make you read. And it's not necessarily the most practical everyday advice. Sometimes it's something that's a 1% thing, whether it's, on any end, entrepreneurship. I'll give you an example, like writing off a car in your business. It doesn't make sense to go buy a $240,000 G-Wagon if you're making $80,000 a year in your business. That's not a good financial investment, and I'm not a financial planner. But if you watch enough TikTok videos, you'll be like, I've got to go to a Mercedes dealership. I need a G-Wagon because I need to save taxes. Well, you still have to pay for this shit. It doesn't just drive into your lot like it's a write-off. It's not a tax savings, right? So it's a little different. Like, they don't give you money to go buy this car. You have to still make it. And I've seen these TikTok videos that will, if you didn't know or research, you would literally be in your car driving to go trade it to get this new car. It actually is a little bit scary, especially for younger people that is who they trust. That is the information source that they trust. So that's a great point. I'm really glad you brought up the social media thing, because it is very sensationalized.
Absolutely. So when we're working with somebody on financial planning, once we have some clarity around where they're headed, what they want to accomplish, then we go through all their financial information. So I don't even look at their financial information until I fully understand where they're headed. Once we look through their financial, every single plan is unique. We're looking at all of the same things, making sure risk management is in place, making sure tax efficiency is there, making sure that investments are optimized, that cash flow is strong, cash reserves are appropriate. We're looking at all of these different things, but the plan itself is different for everybody. Some people start with us with a lot of debt, and we're trying to figure out, how do we minimize the interest expense in order to get you out of debt faster? Sometimes people have very solid savings. They're really good savers, but they're very anxious about investing any of that savings. And so keeping up with inflation becomes a really important conversation, and why people need to invest and why it's so important. But really, every plan is unique, and it's based on what your goals are, what you're currently doing, and how do we optimize to get you from point A to point B, essentially.
Yeah, I think that's awesome that you're doing bespoke, but you have a certain process that you're going through. And so if people wanted to work with you, I know you're certified in multiple states, but where are you actually certified to do this work?
We can work with people nationwide.
Okay, perfect. So if you need financial advisement, if you want to talk about tax strategy, any of these things, and we're going to put the links into your website so that people can find you. And I actually obviously have a women-led business. I am a woman, and I am in a very male-dominated place. And I think I remember the conversation in my first sales meeting where I didn't understand what the word EBITDA meant, and I had to Google it under the table. And this was, when I first started in a corporate job, we didn't use the word EBITDA in my dad's business. We had it and we understood it, but we talked about it in a layman's term, right? I just didn't know that word. And I think that that's the thing. If you don't know, if you're not sure, especially if you're a woman who, really has that drive, knowledge to do more, to learn more, there are so many free resources. Like you already referenced a webinar that you do for free. There are a lot of books you can read. There are just a lot of different things. Is there a book or something like that you might recommend for especially women, but anyone to read that would help them kind of get the 101 version of this?
I'm a big fan of Jen Cicero's You're a Badass at Making Money.
I love that.
So that's a good one. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. And it says badass in it. So how can you not like that, right? She's awesome. Yeah. I love that book too. I think that's a really good one to recommend. Well, I want to segue a little bit into the asset classes, and we talked a little bit. Talk to me about, people have fan favorites. Again, social media has sensationalized things like short-term rentals, but then you read articles like the real estate market's going to crash and there's too many short-term rentals and all these different things. What would you say to people who are really trying to figure out, and I know that they need to come to you and get a bespoke plan for that because it is individualized, but what asset classes do you feel like are really a great thing to just kind of look into if you were going to say, hey, 3 or 4 things that if you had some money to invest to look at?
So, Stefanie, I am a boring financial advisor. And I am no interest in whatever the trend is here or the trend is there. For me, it starts with the risk profile. and really understanding what somebody's tolerance is for risk. If they have a high tolerance for risk, then we can look at more aggressive kinds of, stocks or individual investments. If they have a low tolerance for risk, the most important thing is that we're keeping them invested, right? The only way you lose money when you're investing is when you sell when the market is down. But all areas of the market can be down. So, people look to bonds as sort of that safety net. But what we've seen in recent years, when interest rates were rising, the value of bonds went down, right? There's an inverse relationship there. So I am all about diversification. Now, with that being said, I do have that equity research background, so I probably have a little bit more of a bias towards individual stocks, ETFs, mutual funds that are invested in equities, and, really looking at those that have a very strong record. I'm not looking for the next hottest, investment tip. I'm looking for those who, if they pay a dividend, they pay it consistently. They've increased it consistently over the years. Excuse me, they're highly profitable. So looking at those standard basic foundational companies, that's how you build wealth, is when you get serious about investing, you understand what you're investing in, which is really important. I'm a big fan of Warren Buffett and really understanding what you're investing in, and keep it simple. It doesn't have to be overly complicated, but don't put your eggs in all your eggs in one basket, right? Diversification is really critical. And a lot of what we do is risk management and making sure that people don't have too much of a concentration in any one area of the market. And that includes real estate. So when we have big real estate investors, we're still limiting the percentage of their overall wealth that they're putting into the market. 2008, 2009, for those of you who were homeowners during that time, I remember my house value just dropping off a cliff.
Yeah.
And it took a long time for that to rebound.
Well, and this podcast is more geared towards my background, which is construction. In 2008 is like literally a 4-letter word. It's numbers, but it's a 4-letter word in the industry. And it was a time that basically everyone pretty much lost their shorts. And a lot of people, it took 5, 10, 15 years. Sometimes it didn't come back. They closed and they're gone. So I think that is a great point. And a lot of these people, that were business owners, they had to rethink everything basically from that point, from a financial standpoint, and what do they do? How do they leverage and all of those things? And I think, like you said, risk tolerance and knowing where you are in your career and how much longer you have until maybe you retire, all of those things matter. And so that's a great way to segue into just, basically you got to call someone who knows and let them just look over where you're at and what you want to do and go from there. Because I'm very much in the mind of let the professionals do what the professionals do. Because, you wouldn't want a heart surgeon that's never operated on anyone before. You would want someone who's been doing it a long time and understands the nuances. So same thing for money. So I want to talk a little bit more about your niche. You help people going through divorce. And as you mentioned from your background, it's something that you have been through. You understood the financial impact, especially after you had adopted 3 children. The impact of that had already happened. Talk to me about how you help people, what that looks like, and just a little bit of the obviously significant impact on someone's finances that can happen when you are divorcing, whether it's, a pretty good situation where they're still friendly or a pretty hostile divorce. It obviously can range. What does that look like, and how do you work with people?
Yeah, absolutely. So first and foremost, it's really important as you enter into any transition that you have a lot of clarity around your finances. You know when money's coming in, where it's coming from, how much is coming, when it's going out, how much is going out, why it's going out. You want to know what your assets are, what you own, what your liabilities are, what you owe. All of that clearly spelled out. Now, you might not know it all at once, and that's fine. I get that. Most people don't. So if you're in the camp of like, I can't sit here and give you an answer on that right now, you are definitely not alone. But taking some time to really pull out documents, look at statements, and see where you stand. That's really important because a lot is going to change. And how we prepare for change is that starting point, knowing what that starting point looks like. It's also really important, just like I was talking with general financial planning, to really think about what your goals, your priorities, and your concerns are. So for example, I have a lot of people who reach out to me who say, I really want to stay in the marital home and I just don't know if I can afford it. Well, that's a goal that may or may not be attainable. We can take a look and do an analysis and see, well, what does this mean for you to stay in the home? What is it going to be from a cash flow standpoint? Are you going to have to refinance your mortgage? If so, do you currently have a very low interest rate and it's going to jump to a significantly higher interest rate? What does that mean for your payment? Looking at all of these various factors and also the emotional ones that are tied into it too, right? I want to make sure that my kids have a stable home, that they don't have to move in the middle of high school, that they can stay in the same school that they're at. There's a lot of things that come up when we're talking about change and how we are willing to impact our family or not willing to impact our family. That goes well beyond the financial conversation, right? But we take all of that into account. So we look at retirement accounts, we look at savings. One of the best things you can do for yourself if you know any transition is coming up, you're buying a house, you're moving, you're going through a divorce, you're dealing with any kind of medical issues, make sure that you have a good amount of savings. Make sure that you have cash reserves in place. Everything always costs more than people think it's going to cost. It just does. And so having that flexibility, those cash reserves give you options. It gives you flexibility. It gives you that kind of space, if you will, to work through some of these changes that you may be experiencing. But specifically when it comes to divorce, expenses are going up and income is staying the same, right? So for most people, they're going from one household to two households. Now, sometimes there's more households involved, but you figure there's another household that's going to increase the household expenses. And most people are not increasing their income during this period of time. And so that's a serious change for a lot of people, especially for those who are already living above their means, who are already dealing with credit card bills or other kinds of debts, car loans and what have you. And so can you afford to stay in that home? Maybe, but maybe not. Maybe it's time to downsize and look at how do we reduce fixed expenses. I talk with clients a lot about fixed versus variable expenses, because if you have high fixed expenses, again, you don't have a lot of flexibility. You're tied into those expenses. But when you're able to keep your fixed expenses lower, that gives you a lot more flexibility in those variable expenses. So your fixed expenses are going to be things like your mortgage and your rent, your utilities, your cell phone, those bills that you have every single month in and month out. Your variable expenses are ones that you have more control over from month to month. Think about groceries, dining out, entertainment, clothing, things like that. And so that's where you have some flexibility. But the fixed expenses, if they are higher than your income, that's going to be a problem because you just can't cover those expenses. Then what are you doing? You dip it into your investments, pulling out investments to be able to maintain your lifestyle. That can only last for so long. Now, one of the things that we do often do work with people on is repositioning their assets so that way they can generate more income from their assets. So that's a way to make more income. So for example, you were mentioning short-term rentals before, Stefanie. That's a way that some people like to position their assets in order to generate income, right? Dividend-paying stocks, bonds, high-yield savings accounts. All of these are ways that we can generate income on your assets in order to be able to help you work through this transition. But ideally, long-term, you want your assets to be more positioned for growth and income if you want to see your portfolio grow significantly over time.
One question that I have for you is, obviously divorces can take a long time. You don't know exactly where things are going to land, especially with spousal support or alimony or child care, payments. How do you handle that? I mean, I'm guessing you work with people in all stages of divorce from, pre-filing. Hopefully they come to you ahead of time to all the way through the whole thing. How do you handle that variability of not really knowing exactly what's going to happen until maybe a final settlement's done?
Yeah, one of the things that we do is we show clients ranges. What's realistic in your settlement? So if we're looking at spousal support, what's a realistic spousal support scenario? Child support, what are we looking at? We can use the state's calculators to figure that out, right? If we're looking at, how assets will be divided, we can look at a range of things. We can see kind of where the tension is in negotiations and see, what's going to be in your best interest. Because honestly, a lot of times people get really focused on one specific thing that may or may not be in their best interest. I had a couple who was going through mediation and the husband was very financially savvy, but he was very attached to a particular retirement account. He ended up giving wife significantly more Roth IRA assets, which are actually worth a lot more because Roth assets are post-tax and they grow tax-free, whereas the account that he wanted to hold on to was pre-tax. And so it was actually worth significantly less than what he was giving up, but he was just so focused on that account that he had a hard time looking at anything else.
Yeah, that emotional connection is so strong, and we often have a hard time separating that. Sometimes, things that don't really matter in the scheme of things. That's actually an interesting point in negotiation, to find out what actually matters to the other person, not even in divorce, but in a sales situation or anything, because the thing that they care about the most may be actually something you don't care about, and you can give them a win, and then you get a win on something else that maybe they don't really care about. And it's kind of funny, but we often feel like we understand and know what people want. And in any negotiation, a lot of times we don't. The thing we think is most important to them, maybe they don't even care about.
It's so true. And especially when people have been married a long time, they make a lot of assumptions that they know exactly where the other person is coming from. And Stefanie, you're exactly right. They don't always know. And that's why I really encourage people to approach negotiations with an open mind and active listening, because that's really going to help them understand where this other person is coming from and where you might be able to tweak things so that way you both get a win.
Yeah, absolutely. We talked a lot about what we're doing. Obviously, you're doing financial advising, and we're both women in business. I want to talk a little bit more about entrepreneurship and that journey. You've been doing this a long while now, and you are obviously successful in several different businesses, and I know you're always doing traveling, and you've been in a lot of networking groups. You're very involved with NABU. I want you to talk to me a little bit about your journey as an entrepreneur, some of the challenges you've had or that a new entrepreneur might watch out for, and then also some of the amazing parts of being an entrepreneur, because it's definitely, for me, I'm about 2 years in, has been ups and downs. Some days I feel like I'm getting kicked in the face all day, and some days I feel like I'm literally being, like paraded in my dream life. And that can be on the same day, actually. So what has your experience been, and what would you tell other people that are maybe looking into entrepreneurship?
So when I first started, like I said, I was just coming out of my divorce. I wasn't necessarily knowing that I wanted to be a business owner, but I was knowing that I needed the flexibility for my family. And so I did whatever people would pay me for from a financial standpoint. So I did spreadsheets, I did pricing analysis, I did all kinds of random projects that people would pay me for. And you can't grow a business just you can make money that way, but it wasn't a business at first. So it took me some time to really kind of commit to, this is what I'm doing, this is what I'm offering, and I will find the right clients to fill the need that I personally had.
That's really hard. Yeah. When you got to have money and you need to get paid for something, you're like, sure, I can do that. And then you why did I say yes to that? When you're fulfilling it, you're like, why am I doing this? Or like you said, it's just almost impossible to scale because you're everything to everyone. And, I've learned that lesson the hard way several times already. But again, sometimes you do what you have to do. And sometimes you don't know what that one thing or two things are until you test 20 things. And you're like, well, those 18 definitely were not it. That's usually, I learned a lot about that pretty quickly. Nope, not the thing we're going to be doing. But those other one or two kind of start to stand out. And what do you enjoy and what are you getting asked for,
Yeah, absolutely. So that took me some time to kind of figure out for sure. Then as I've grown, there's definitely been growing pains along the way, hiring the wrong people along the way, making those mistakes. I went through a period of time where I just thought, I cannot hire people. I am terrible at it. But I found out that, there's skills involved. And you learn those skills, you develop those skills, and then you find the right people. And I have such an amazing team in place now, Stefanie, that I love working with them. I'm excited to support them and cheer them on. It's just fantastic.
How many people do you have on your team?
There's six people on my team.
Yeah. That's awesome.
But that was definitely not an overnight thing. Like I said, there were a lot of missteps along the way. And, again, as a business owner, you're wasting a tremendous amount of money when you make those mistakes, right? But you have to be willing to make the mistakes.
We call it ignorance tax around here at the couch house.
I love it.
Like, it's me and Ben are like, okay, that was really stupid and that cost us $8,000 and just put it in the ignorance tax jar. Like, I mean, that's all you can do is just kind of laugh and say, we're gonna go make more money doing something else, like, or not do, we won't do that again. That was painful. That one was a steep ignorance tax. But I mean, you don't know. And that's the thing is I was in a big business, corporate business for a long time, 10 years. They had money, they could just write blank checks, 8-figure checks for like no big deal, right? Especially 7-figure checks on equipment and people and all these things. And then even in my small business experience with my dad, he was like 20 years in, right? I mean, he had the business a long time. His dad had a business before. Starting something from scratch with no money, really, like, that's some hard shit. And people don't get how hard that is. And I like this. I don't know if you've seen this before, but it's actually in the 12-week year. And then there's also, it's in Alex Hormozy talks about it, but it's like the cycle of change. And the first part is uninformed optimism. Like, we're going to make $10 million doing this, like, this is going to be so awesome and so fun and so easy. We're going to work 6 hours a week. Like, yeah, right. And then the next step is, I think it's like informed pessimism, like, oh, this isn't as easy as we thought. This is really actually pretty terrible. And then you go through 3 more steps. And eventually, most people never get past that informed pessimism, or the next valley of despair is the third one. And that one is like, oh, well, this really is pretty horrible. And I'm miserable and I hate this. But if you just wait it out and keep going, like, you continue to get better. And then at the end, you're back to that, hey, this is not so bad because I understand I have the skills. But most people quit at that valley of despair or before, because it's hard. And it's not just entrepreneurship, but anything in entrepreneurship, it can get really lonely and really hard, especially if you're doing it by yourself.
I'll tell you the most amazing thing, though. So this year, my youngest son has a project for Women's History Month, and he had to pick a woman to do a project on. And if you search my name on the internet, there's plenty of information that comes up about me.
Yeah.
So his teacher allowed him to pick me as his woman. Yes, that's
like worth it all.
Exactly.
That's awesome. I need you to put that on your website. Like, this is my son's opinion of what I am. That's so amazing. I love that. There's an exercise I do with my coaching clients. It's called the empty chair exercise. And it's basically that, but you do it from your voice. But hey, Leah, what would your son say about you? And like, then you say in your son's voice what he would say about you. And you actually have that from him. That's so special. I want you to send that to me. I would love to see that.
Okay.
That's awesome. Well, I think, what other, opportunities or things have you seen as you grew? You grew the team. Delegating is a superpower, like you said. What hiring things do you now look for? I mean, you went through the growing pains of feeling like you were terrible at hiring, but you said there's a system. What do you look for in a team? Because obviously now you've figured that out and you've grown to 6 people that you really enjoy working with. What are you looking for? What do you ask? And how are you thinking about hiring differently now?
So I really focus on a cultural fit now. Really focused on finding people that share our values and our commitment to the work that we do. We work with a lot of people who are going through a difficult time in their life, not just through divorce, but for a lot of different things, loss of a loved one, losing a job. I think it's exciting when I'm one of the first calls when one of my clients loses their job, because they know that I'm there to support them and help them through that transition. It means a lot to me. But we go through lots of celebrations too, of course, but we need people who are empathetic. We need people who really care about our clients in a meaningful way, because I want the clients to feel like no matter who they're talking to, they're going to be taken care of.
Yeah, that is so important. And I think you can teach skills. I mean, to some extent, there's some people that, maybe can't be taught certain things because they just don't want to or can't learn. But most of the time, I think that core part of who you are, your values, all that aligning, you can't really teach that. If someone doesn't have values that are the same as you or your company, very similar, it's very hard to make that fit together. And it usually, even if they're an impeccable performer, the best skills you've ever seen, it just doesn't last. And I'm already finding that, with even some subcontractors and even with clients. Sometimes it's like, hey, we're just not really aligned and it's too hard to try to make it fit. And I think that's that client market fit, the product market fit, and the team fit. Once you kind of get that and you know what you're looking at and who you're looking for, life gets a little bit easier, especially as an entrepreneur. And that's a nice thing to start to feel. What would you say to a woman who is going through a tough time, maybe a divorce, specifically a woman that maybe feels like she doesn't have much leverage and she's obviously, worried, scared? What would you say to her, like the first thing you would do with her and talk to her about is?
Yeah. So I really encourage people when they are very stressed about money, when they are really worried about, maybe it's keeping them up at night or it's just preoccupying them in a meaningful way, is to just take out some paper and start writing. Get it out of your head. What are you actually worried about? Some of people's fears are very well founded. Absolutely. There's no question about it. But some of them aren't. And a lot of them we can actually look at when we go through the financial planning process and we can see, is this something that you have to be worried about or not, right? I hear all the time, like people are worried about eating cat food in retirement. I don't know why it's cat food in particular, but that's what I always hear. Well, that's something that we can illustrate for you. And if there is a concern that you're going to run out of money, then you can take proactive steps in order to be able to make sure that doesn't happen, right?
Yeah.
I'm a big believer that you are in control of your income. And so that means looking at your income with a critical eye and saying, am I comfortable with where I'm at? Or do I need to increase this? And if so, taking the steps you need to take in order to do that.
Yeah.
And so a lot of times some of the worry or the fear is just kind of not being proactive and taking control of your situation. But we first want to get really clear on what those worries are. And then we can kind of look at how to address each of them.
I think that's really brilliant advice, actually, for anybody going through anything they're stressed about, whether it's finances or anything. Write it down. Or if you don't like to write, put it in your phone, dictate it, whatever it is. Because a lot of times, like you said, those worst fears, those worst case scenarios that are nightmares, there's number one, they're usually not going to happen. I mean, sometimes in what you're doing with divorce is pretty bad for a lot of people. It is a worst nightmare situation. But a lot of times the worst nightmare is not going to happen. And then also, if you write it down, you realize sometimes, like, I'm worrying about this and I didn't even realize this is the thing. Like, it's deep down, it's 40 layers deep, and then you start to write and figure it out. And there's a lot of healing that can happen. I personally, when I write, I feel very cathartic. It's very healing to me. And I was actually talking to a friend last week who's writing a book, and she was remembering some things from like a teenage year, some traumatic stuff that happened to her. And she was like, I feel so much better now that I've written this. And I think that's really powerful. So that's a really great piece of advice. Thank you for that. Well, this is called the Grit Blueprint. And I know the word grit means a lot to me, and I feel like it's really important to me in different ways. What does the word grit mean to you?
To me, it's about not giving up. It's about just having that internal motivation to keep going regardless of your situation, to put blinders on in some cases, because sometimes there's all this extra noise out there that you just need to kind of cut through.
Yeah.
And just believe in yourself, believe in your ability to just keep moving forward.
I love that. And especially in times that you're going through something stressful like a divorce, to have people around you that also have grit to keep you going. So I think that's powerful. And you obviously have built a business supporting people in some of their most times of need, and also when they're just trying to do the best thing they can with their money for their future. So I love what you're doing. I think it's very important. I also love that you're a badass woman business owner. So does your son. So you're obviously raising them right. I love that. Thank you so much for being on the Grit Blueprint podcast. And we are going to add all of your information in, but you are on LinkedIn and you have obviously a website. So we're going to add that in. But if someone wants to connect, if they want to learn more, they can just reach out to you and your team and get all of the information they need. And then, like you said, those free resources are out there that you have to go and utilize and just learn a little bit more about this subject that's so important.
Absolutely. And we do offer free workshops on a regular basis. So do connect with me and I will share that information. There's so much to learn, but you can do it. So
that's amazing.
I'm here for it.
Thank you, Leah. And we will talk to you next time on the Grit Blueprint.